Hey guys, today is February 17th. That means we're in Acts chapter 17. I just want to say it was so nice to have Tim and Pastor Tim and Pastor Ron do a day or two. It's so nice to work with staff who know their Bible, who care about the church, and want to help educate you along with me so that we can know our Bible and read our Bible together. Man, it's just great working with some great staff. But starting in Acts chapter 17, we're kind of at the beginning of Paul's secondary missionary journey. It actually began in the middle of chapter 16, but now he's going back out and he's traveling. And the first place we see is he comes onto the city of Thessalonica. Now, if you read your New Testament, there's two books in there, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. These are letters to the church in Thessalonica. But before he writes them, now he's kind of setting it up. So he's in Thessalonica. And what happens is what he always does. He goes to the synagogue, and it says that he is there debating with the Jews, talking with the Jews for 3 Sabbaths. So he's there for 3 weeks at the synagogue, talking to people, telling them about Jesus, telling them about why Jesus is the Messiah. And it says that many Jews and many Greek Jews, which is Hellenistic Jews, this is the same type of Jews that we've been talking about, all in Acts, just Jews who were not born in Palestine, came to follow Christ. And with that, they became disciples of Paul. Paul is now discipling them and teaching them and training them to become a church. But those who did not believe that Jesus was Lord, that Jesus was the Messiah, do what they did in almost every other city. They've kind of got this mob mentality, and now they want to kill Paul because he's talking bad about Judaism and more about Jesus. So this mob couldn't find Paul and Silas, but they do find this guy named Jason, who Paul and Silas has been staying with. And so they kind of take him to court, and they say, well, we can't find Paul and Silas, so we want to kill Jason. Luckily, the court says, no, you can't do that. And they basically take all of his money, but they let him go. But during this time, Paul and Silas, with the church's help, escapes, and they send him away. They send him to the next city, which is Berea. And they go into Berea, and much like they did in Thessalonica, they do the same thing. They start preaching. A lot of people believe, but some don't. While they're in Berea, the Jews that were in Thessalonica have heard that they were there, and they followed them. And so these Jews coming to be this mob and to kill Paul and Silas, the church, once again, helps put Paul in a ship and sends him to Athens. And so he goes, but Silas and Timothy stay there in Berea. Well, when Paul gets to Athens, when you hear the word Athens, what you probably think is correct. We think about mythology, we think about Zeus and Hercules, and we think about all these. That's Athens. Athens is a huge city. It even says when we read that it was a lot of idols, a lot of statues, a lot of gods, and even there was one to the unknown because they just wanted to cover all their bases. But as Paul waits for Silas and Timothy to get there, he just basically starts talking to people on the street. He starts talking to Jews and it says devout people, which is religious people. Basically, everybody in Athens believed in lots of gods. And so, as Paul's waiting on Silas and Timothy to get there, he's talking about these gods and why Jesus is better, and even talking with these philosophers that have been studying all this kind of philosophy and thoughts. And so Paul's kind of really getting into this kind of apologetic, why Jesus is better than anything else. Well, this crowd is starting to believe, but some are not. But they take Paul to this guy named Areopagus, or Areopagus, whatever you want to say. It's okay. But basically, this was kind of like the chief guy over kind of all the gods. And so they take him, and they basically, the crowd wants to say, what do you have to say about what this guy Paul is saying? And Areopagus basically says, hey, Paul, tell us your story. So Paul starts telling about why Jesus is the real God. And he makes point to the fact that says, hey, you have a statue for the one God, the unknown God. And basically he just says, I do know the one God. There's not a bunch of gods. There's one. We know his name. We know who he is. We know what he's come to do. And he explains everything about Jesus to them. And it says that a lot of people, after they hear this, they believe. And they believe what Paul's saying. They believe in Jesus Christ. They go from death to life. But some don't. And much like every other city, some don't. And what happens? Paul has to leave. There's two really things that come to mind when we think about this. One is Paul has a systematic approach of how he's reaching people. Every city he goes in, he goes to the synagogue, and then he starts doing this and this and this. Church, that's us. We must have a plan of how we're going to reach not only our city, but how we're going to reach our county, how we're going to reach our state. God has given that to us. And that was in Acts chapter 1. We start in our city and we move out and we keep moving out. And so the second thing is, in every city Paul goes to, there's people who believe, they hear the gospel and they accept what Jesus Christ did for them and they become believers and they join the church. But then on the other hand, there's half of them that don't. And as we share the gospel, as we go out, as we share faith with our family and our friends and our neighbors and everybody around us, we cannot be discouraged that people do not accept the gospel. God has called us to simply share the gospel, and God will take care of it. We see that Paul did that. Some accepted, some did not, and he moved on. That's what Jesus has called us to do, to share the gospel with fervent, with faith, with knowledge, and those who believe will believe, and to keep moving on. Today's prayer focus is to be praying for our neighbors. Be thinking about not only the neighbors that live on both sides of you, but on your street or in your apartment building, wherever you're at. Be praying for opportunities to meet them and to get to know them and to live out your faith for them and to be able to be a good neighbor for them. We got some really great things coming up in the month of May and for the rest of the summer, how the church is going to help you partner with your neighbors and to be able to do some really neat things for your neighbors. And you'll hear more about that as it gets close to Easter, but it's going to be an exciting time. Guys, I'm so glad we're doing this, and I'm already looking forward to day 18. Have a great day. God bless.